Halfway through the third hour of a duty I had stood 100 times, I watched a man I had served beside for 11 years decide, in the space of a single breath, to die. I did not know that was what I was watching. None of us did. That is the thing about the moment a life is saved by the spending of another. It never announces itself. It comes dressed as an ordinary Tuesday. It comes with the smell of cut grass and warm stone, with a brass band 3 streets over playing something cheerful and a little flat, with the squeak of a balloon seller's cart and the patient shuffle of 1,000 pairs of shoes pressed up against the rope line. It comes, in my case, with my own boredom, because I had been counting the minutes until the relief came at 4, and thinking about nothing more dangerous than whether the canteen would still have the good bread. My name is Sergeant Tavin Reyes. I have worn the red of the Eldermoor Royal Guard for 19 years, and on the afternoon I am going to tell you about I was posted at the eastern approach to the Mereford Pavilion, a long pale building of glass, an iron that the royal house of Harrogate keeps for the people. Not a palace, exactly, but a place where the family of the kingdom comes out to be among the kingdom. There was a children's hospital wing being opened that day. A new one, paid for in part by a foundation that bears the Queen's name, and the Queen herself had come to cut the ribbon, which meant the crowd was enormous and good-humored, and entirely unaware that anything in their world could go wrong. I want to tell you about the man who saved a life that day. His name was Corporal Win Caldera, and to do him justice I have to tell you what kind of man he was before the thing happened, because afterward everyone in the kingdom decided he was a hero, and a hero is a flat thing, a poster, a name read out at a ceremony. Win was not flat. Win was a particular and stubborn and frequently irritating human being, and I loved him the way you love a brother you would also occasionally like to throw into a lake. He was 34. He had a wife named Della and a daughter, Pip, who was 6 and missing her 2 front teeth, and who drew pictures of her father as a stick figure roughly the size of the palace itself, towering over a red crayon scribble that was meant to be the gates. He had come to the Guard the long way, by way of 3 years in a mountain regiment where he had learned to be cold and patient and to carry more than seemed possible, and he had a scar on the back of his left hand from a thing he never explained, and a way of standing his post that the younger lads tried to copy and never quite managed. It was not the stillness, exactly. Anyone can hold still. It was that Win was always, somehow, already looking at the thing that was about to matter. You would follow his eyes and find, 3 seconds before anyone else did, the kid who had wandered too far, the bag left where no bag should be, the face in the crowd that did not fit. You watch the people, he told me once early on when I was still green enough to ask him why he never seemed to look at the dignitaries. Everyone watches the important ones. The important ones are fine. They've got us. You watch the people because the people are the weather, and the weather is where the trouble comes from. I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count. That Tuesday the weather was fine. I mean that in both ways. The sky over Mereford was a high, clean blue with a few clouds dragged thin across it, and the people were as gentle a crowd as you could ask for, families mostly, and a great many small children up on shoulders, and old men with regimental pins on their caps who had come because they liked to see the uniform done properly. There was a barrier of steel pens along the front of the pavilion, and beyond it a wide swept forecourt of pale flagstones, and beyond that the road, Coronation Drive, which had been closed to traffic for the occasion from the river bridge all the way down to the Old Mint. Closed. That word is going to come back. Hold on to it. At 2 o'clock the Queen arrived. I will not pretend I am above the small thrill of it, even after 19 years. Queen Saraland has a way of arriving that makes a great machine of people feel briefly, like a family at a holiday. She is not a young woman, and she does not pretend to be. She came down the pavilion steps in a coat the color of cornflowers with her husband, the Prince Consort Aldrich, a half step behind and to her right as he always is, and she went straight to the rope where the children were, and she crouched, actually crouched, in front of the cameras with her knees on the cold flagstone, to be at the height of a little boy who had been waiting since dawn to give her a drawing. I watched 1,000 phones go up. I watched the old men with the regimental pins go quietly to pieces. And behind her, coming down the steps in her own good time, was the woman this story is really about. Her name was Marissa. I will spell it the way the heralds did, Marissa, the Princess Royal, the Queen's elder sister, though she had never wanted the throne and had spent a long life making herself useful instead of important. She was 70 if she was a day. She ran the Children's Foundation. The new hospital wing was hers as much as anyone's, the result of 15 years of her writing letters and shaming the wealthy and sitting through committee meetings that would have broken a stronger constitution. She was small and straight-backed, and she wore her white hair pinned up under a hat that had been fashionable, I would guess, sometime around the year I was born. She walked with a silver-topped cane, more from habit than need, and she had the kind of face that has decided, somewhere along the way, to be kind on purpose, which is a harder and rarer thing than being kind by nature. The Princess Royal came down to the forecourt, and because the Queen was busy with the children, and because Marissa had spent her whole life being the one who handled the things no one else thought of, she crossed the swept flagstones toward the far rope, where a knot of patients from the old wing had been brought out in chairs to see the day, small figures wrapped in blankets, a nurse or two, a banner they had made themselves. She wanted to thank them. That was all. That was the entire content of her intention in that moment. To cross 40 feet of empty stone and thank some sick children for coming. Wynne was posted at the western end of the forecourt, nearest the closed road. I could see him from where I stood, a red figure under the iron lamp, his eyes already doing the thing they always did, going out past the rope, past the crowd, to the long, empty stretch of Coronation Drive that no car was supposed to be on. I saw him go still, not the trained stillness, he was always in that. This was different. This was the stillness of a man who has just heard a sound the rest of us have not heard yet, the way a deer goes rigid an instant before the herd breaks. I followed his eyes the way I had learned to all those years ago. Far up the closed road, where the river bridge made a pale arch against the sky, something was moving. Something low and dark and wrong, growing, eating the distance between the bridge and the forecourt at a speed that did not belong on a street full of people. And in the middle of the empty stone, with her back to the bridge and her kind, purposeful face turned toward the children she meant to thank, the Princess Royal took another step forward. I need to make you understand how slow time becomes when it is about to be spent. There is a lie people tell about emergencies, that they happen fast. They do not. They happen, the worst of them, in a kind of terrible patience, where you are given just exactly enough time to see everything you are about to be unable to prevent. I had 3 seconds. I have gone over them so many times since that I can lay them out like cards on a table. In the first second I understood what I was seeing. A car. A dark estate car, the heavy kind a family uses, on a road that had been closed since 6 that morning behind steel barriers and 2 police vans and a sign as big as a door. It should not have been there. The mind does a strange thing when it meets a wrongness that large it tries for a fraction of an instant to fix it. Surely a police escort. Surely it will slow. Surely someone, somewhere up the line, has this in hand. I felt my own mind reach for those comforts and find them empty, because the car was not slowing. The car was, if anything, getting faster, weaving once, hard, around the abandoned barrier at the bridge end, as though the driver could not quite decide which side of the road he wanted, and then straightening and coming on, straight down the center of Coronation Drive, straight at the swept forecourt where the Princess Royal stood alone in 40 feet of open stone. In the second I started to run, and I knew, even as I ran, that I was too far. I was 150 feet away, at the eastern end, with the steel pens and the crowd between me and her. I might as well have been in another country. I shouted. I have no memory of the words, only of the rawness it left in my throat for 2 days after, and I saw heads in the crowd begin to turn, and I saw 2 of the police constables near the bridge end begin, far too late to move. None of it mattered. None of us could reach her. The geometry of the thing was already finished. A line drawn from the car to the Princess Royal passed through nobody but empty air, and she was looking the wrong way, and she was old, and she was not going to move in time because she did not yet know there was anything to move from. And in the 3rd second, Wynne moved. I want to be precise about this, because precision is the only gift I can still give him. He did not freeze and then break, the way the stories tell it. There was no moment of decision that I could see, no visible weighing of his own life against hers. He was at the western lamp, the nearest point of the rope to her, perhaps 30 feet from where she stood, and he was the only living thing on that forecourt positioned by the blind accident of the duty roster to have any chance at all. And he simply was already moving before I had finished my first shout, before the crowd had finished turning, as if the decision had been made years ago in a mountain regiment, or in the way a man chooses to stand his post. And all that remained on this particular Tuesday was the execution of it. He went over the steel pen. Not around, over, one gloved hand on the top rail, his rifle gone from his shoulder in the same motion and skidding away across the flagstones where it could do no harm, the bearskin knocked from his head and rolling like a black wheel. He hit the open stone running, and he ran at the Princess Royal the way you run at the only thing in the world that matters, and the car came on, and for one unbearable instant the 3 of them, the old woman, the running man, the dark machine, made a shape on the pale forecourt that I will see on the inside of my eyelids until the day I die. She heard it at last. At the very end she heard it, and she turned, and her kind face went open and astonished, the way a face does when it meets the impossible, and her silver-topped cane began to lift in the useless gesture of a person who has nothing else to raise against a thing that weighs 2 tons. And Wynne reached her. He reached her with perhaps a half-second to spare, and he did not try to pull her. There was no time to pull. Pulling would have left them both in the line of it. He did the only thing that the geometry allowed. He put both hands flat against her shoulder and the side of her, and he threw her. He threw a 70-year-old woman as hard as he could sideways, off her feet, out of the line, onto the stone beyond it, and the throwing of her put him exactly where she had been. The car took him. I am not going to describe it the way it has been described in the cheaper papers. I was there, and I will tell you what I saw and no more. I saw him turn in the last fraction so that it was his side and his back that met it and not his face, a soldier's instinct to the very end, to keep something of himself oriented and alive. I saw him lifted. I saw the dark machine swerve at the final instant. The driver, whatever else was true of him, did try too late to swerve. And that swerve was the difference between a man who would be buried that week and a man who would, against everything, be standing in a hospital corridor 4 months later watching his daughter draw him in crayon. I saw Wynne come down on the far side of the forecourt, hard, terribly hard, and not get up. And I saw the car slew sideways across the swept stone, miss the rope line by the width of a hand, clip the iron base of the western lamp, and come at last to a stop against the pavilion wall with its hood folded up like paper and its horn screaming a single flat note that went on and on and on. Then the sound came back into the world. It had gone for those 3 seconds. I had heard nothing, not the band, not the crowd, not my own shouting. And now it all returned at once. 10,000 people making the sound that 10,000 people make when they have all together just understood. And it was the worst sound I have ever heard, and I was running through it toward the broken shape of my friend on the stone with my whole chest full of a single useless word, which was his name. The Princess Royal was on her hands and knees on the flagstones where he had thrown her, her hat gone, her white hair come loose, and she was not hurt. I want that on the record before anything else. She had a bruise on her hip the size of a saucer, and a scrape on the heel of one hand, and she was, otherwise, entirely and miraculously unharmed, because 30 feet and 3 seconds and one man's body had stood between her and a thing that should have killed her, and the man had spent himself to the last coin to make it so. She was looking at him. Across the stone, through the chaos that was already breaking over us both, the Princess Royal of Eldermoor was looking at the red shape that had been a corporal of the guard 1 minute before, and I have served the royal house my whole adult life, and I had never, until that moment, seen one of them look at one of us like that. I reached him first. I want that on the record, too. He was alive. The first thing before the blood, before the wrongness of the angle his left arm had taken, before any of it. The first thing was that his chest was moving, in short hard hitches, and his eyes were open, and they found mine. A man learns in this work the difference between the eyes of someone who is going and the eyes of someone who is staying, and Wynn's eyes were staying. They were full of pain and they were sliding in and out of focus, but they were fighting, and the fight in them undid me more than stillness would have. "Don't," he said, it came out as barely a shape of breath. "Don't make a fuss." I am told that I laughed. I do not remember it, but 3 different people have sworn to me since that in the middle of that forecourt, with the horn screaming and the crowd howling and my friend broken on the stone, I knelt down and put my hand on the unhurt side of his face and laughed. Because of course, the first words out of Wynn Caldera, having just been struck by a car at speed in front of the entire kingdom, would be an instruction not to draw attention to himself. "You absolute fool," I said. "You magnificent fool, lie still. Don't move your neck. Tavan's here. Tavan's got you." "The princess," his eyes went past me trying to find her. "Is she?" "She's fine. You threw her clear. She's sitting up." Not a scratch. That was a small mercy and a small lie braided together. The saucer-sized bruise was a scratch, by the standards of what had nearly happened, and his eyes closed for a moment, and something in his ruined face eased, and I understood that he had been holding the question like a man holding his breath underwater, and that my answer had let him come up. Then the world arrived all at once. It does in the end. The cavalry is always 3 seconds late and then comes in a flood. The Queen's own physician, a calm gray man named Dr. Henry who travels everywhere the family goes, was suddenly on his knees on Wynn's other side with his bag already open, saying the short flat sentences of a man who has done this before and intends to do it well. 2 ambulance crews who had been stationed at the rear of the pavilion against exactly the small emergencies of a public day, a fainting, a turned ankle, and who had never in their lives expected this, came across the stone at a dead run with a board and a collar, and the controlled urgency that is the most reassuring thing in the world to be near. The police flooded the road. Somewhere the screaming horn cut off mid-note, and the silence where it had been was its own kind of loud. And the Queen came. I had forgotten her in those first seconds, forgotten that the cause of the whole day, the woman 1,000 phones had been pointed at, was 40 feet away and had seen all of it. But Queen Saralyn did not stay 40 feet away. She came across the forecourt at something just short of a run, with her cornflower coat flying and 2 of her close protection officers failing entirely to keep up, and she did not go to her sister first, which I have never forgotten. She went to her sister second. She went first to the corporal on the ground. She crouched the way she had crouched for the little boy with the drawing, with her knees on the cold flagstone in front of the cameras, and she took Wynn's gloved right hand in both of hers, the good hand, and she held it and she said his name. Not his rank, his name, Corporal Caldera, Wynn. She had learned it from someone in the 3 seconds available to her, or she had always known it, I do not know which, and it does not matter. "You can hear me, stay with us. You are not to leave us. That is a command from your Queen, do you understand me? You are not to leave us." And Wynn, broken, fading, with the doctor's hands already working at the wreck of him, Wynn opened his eyes one last time before they put him under for the road, and he looked up at the Queen of Eldermoor holding his hand on the public stone, and the corner of his mouth pulled, and he said, "Ma'am, I'd stand for that, but I find I can't get up." She laughed. She laughed with her eyes streaming, and she pressed his hand to her cheek for 1 second, one entire second in front of the cameras and the kingdom, and then she let the doctors have him. They took him away with the lights going. I went with him as far as the ambulance doors, and then a hand closed on my shoulder, and it was my own officer, Captain Doane, gray to the lips, and he said the only thing that could have stopped me climbing into that ambulance. "Rays, you're a witness. The road was closed. Somebody put a car on a closed road full of people, and right now you are the man who saw it from end to end. I need you here." And the soldier in me, the part Wynne himself had built over 19 years, turned away from the ambulance and went back to do the work, and the doors shut, and the lights and the sound of him dwindled away down Coronation Drive toward the hospital, and the long second part of that day began. Because here is the thing nobody in that howling crowd yet understood, the thing that would take 3 days, and a great deal of quiet, ugly work to drag into the light. The road had been closed since 6 that morning, closed properly, barriers, vans, a manned checkpoint at the bridge and another at the Mint. A car cannot simply find itself on a road like that. A car on that road at that speed at that moment is not a piece of weather. It is a question. And the question, when I finally let myself ask it plainly, standing on the cooling forecourt with my friend's blood drying on the knees of my trousers, and the wrecked estate car being photographed from 9 angles by men in white suits, was very simple and very dark. Had this been an accident at all? I looked at the wreck against the pavilion wall. I looked at the bridge, half a mile up, where the abandoned barrier still stood with its broken end gaping like a missing tooth. I thought about the way the car had weaved once hard coming off the bridge, not the wandering of a man who had taken a wrong turn, but the correction of a man who knew exactly the line he wanted and had overcooked it. I thought about the speed. You do not reach that speed by accident on a half-mile of closed road. You reach it on purpose, you build it. I did not have answers that afternoon. I had a witness statement to give, and a friend in surgery, and a Princess Royal sitting wrapped in a blanket on the pavilion steps refusing, with the iron politeness of her whole generation, to be taken to the hospital until she had personally been told the corporal would live. But I had the question, and the question had teeth, and it would not let me sleep for a long time after. That night very late, when the statements were given and the family had been driven home under a guard tripled in size and the forecourt had been hosed clean, I went to the hospital. They would not let me see him. He was in surgery still, hour upon hour of it, the long patient work of putting a man back together. But Della was there in the waiting room with Pip asleep across 2 chairs and a coat over her, and Della had cried herself past crying and into the flat, exhausted calm that comes after, and she looked up when I came in and she said, "Taven, tell me what he did. The news keeps saying hero. I don't want hero. I want to know what he did." So I told her. I told her exactly what I have told you. And when I got to the part where he put both hands flat against an old woman's shoulder and threw her clear with the last half-second he had, Della closed her eyes and she said, very quietly, "Yes, that's him. That's exactly him." And I understood that she had not needed me to tell her at all, that she had married a man who would always do precisely that, and had known it, and had loved him for it, and was now going to have to pay for it. The surgery finished at 3:20 in the morning. The surgeon who came out to us had the gray, hollow look of a man who has fought all night and is not yet sure he has won. He spoke to Della in the careful, low voice they use, and I caught the shape of it standing back by the window. A broken left arm in 2 places, 4 ribs, a lung that had collapsed and been reinflated, a leg that would need a second operation and a third. Bleeding inside that they had found and stopped. That had been the long part, the dangerous part, the reason for the hours. A bad concussion, and then the sentence Della had been waiting all night to receive, delivered as plainly as the rest. He is going to live. I want to be honest with you, Mrs. Caldera. There was a stretch tonight when I would not have promised you that. but he is strong, and we got to the bleeding in time, and he is going to live." Della did not cry then. She had no crying left. She said thank you in a voice scraped down to nothing. And then she went and sat by her sleeping daughter and put one hand on the child's back so that she would feel her father's survival even in her sleep. And I left them to it. And I walked out into the gray before dawn and stood under the hospital lights and let myself shake, finally, for about a minute, before I put it away and went to find out who had tried to kill the Princess Royal. It was not, in the end, a who that I expected. The truth of it took 3 days to assemble, and it came in pieces, and the shape it finally made was not the clean shape of villainy that the howling crowd and the cheaper papers wanted. It was sadder than that, and stranger, and in some ways harder to forgive, because there was no monster at the bottom of it. There was only the long, careless chain of small failures by people who should have known better, ending in a man who should never have been behind a wheel that day, ending in my friend's broken body on the stone. Let me lay it out the way it was laid out for me, in the operations room at the barracks, by a quiet woman from the palace's own investigative office named Aldrich, Inspector Aldrich, gray-haired and unhurried, with a way of asking questions that made you want to answer them fully. The car belonged to a man named Corwin Pell. He was 61 years old. He was not an assassin, not a fanatic, not an agent of any foreign house. He was a retired mason who lived 2 streets back from Coronation Drive, and on the morning of the opening, he had got into his car to drive to the pharmacy for his wife's prescription, as he did most mornings, and he had, this is the first failure, the human one, forgotten about the closing, forgotten the leaflets that had come through every door for a fortnight, forgotten the signs, forgotten the conversation he had reportedly had with a neighbor the day before about how they'd be hemmed in by it all. Corwin Pell had a diagnosis, fresh that spring, of the kind of slow erasing illness that takes a man's yesterdays before it takes anything else, and his wife had been telling the family doctor for 2 months that he should not be driving, and the family doctor had written a letter, and the letter had gone into a system, and the system had not yet, on that Tuesday morning, gotten around to taking away his license. That was the second failure, a letter in a tray. He had driven to the bridge and found the checkpoint, and here the investigators were never entirely certain, because Corwin Pell himself could not reliably tell them. He had become confused and frightened, the way the illness makes a man confused and frightened, and instead of stopping he had panicked, and he had wrenched the car around the end of the barrier where it had been left a foot too wide. That was the third failure, a barrier left a foot too wide by a constable who had stepped away to deal with a fainting spectator, intending to be gone only a moment. And then a frightened, confused old man with his foot too hard on the pedal had found himself on a long, empty road that his fear told him he had to get off of, that he had to get to the far end of, that he had to escape. And he had built up speed in the way that panic builds it, and the empty stretch had let him. And at the far end of his terror was a forecourt full of people he never saw as people, and an old woman in a hat, and my friend. I will tell you that when Inspector Aldrich finished laying it out, I sat in that operations room and felt the clean hot thing I had been carrying for 3 days, the rage, the need for a villain, go out of me like air from a punctured tire, and I did not feel better for it. I felt worse. A villain you can hate. A villain you can put away and be done with, but there was no villain here. There was a sick old man who would spend whatever was left of his fading mind in the dim knowledge that he had hurt somebody, and not quite be able to hold on to why. There was an overworked constable who would carry that 1 foot of barrier for the rest of his career. There was a letter in a tray and a system that moved too slowly, and 100 small, ordinary human shortfalls that had together, on one blue Tuesday, very nearly killed a princess and very thoroughly broken a good man. So no one is to blame, I said. I meant it bitterly. Inspector Aldrich looked at me for a long moment. That is not what I said, Sergeant. I said there is no villain. Those are different things. A great many people are to blame, each a little. That is how the worst things usually happen, not all at once, by one wicked hand, but a little at a time, by a great many careless ones. The question your office and mine have to answer is not who do we hang. It is, what do we change so that the next confused old man finds a barrier that holds, and the next dangerous license is gone from the road before he ever reaches it. She closed her folder. Your corporal bought us the time to ask that question. He bought it at a terrible price. We had better not waste it. I have thought about that too, more times than I can count. The kingdom, of course, did not want the sad, complicated truth. The kingdom wanted the hero. And for a few days, before Inspector Aldrith's quiet work was done, the kingdom invented a villain anyway, because a crowd that has had a fright needs somewhere to put it. There were ugly rumors. There were men outside Corwin Pell's house with phones, and the family had to be moved for their own safety, which felt like one more cruelty stacked on a situation already overfull of them. And the press, which had 9 angles of video of my friend going over the steel pen and throwing the Princess Royal clear, ran the footage on a loop until the whole world had seen it, and gave him a name he never asked for and would have hated, and the name was the Lamp Guard. After the iron lamp, the car had clipped on its way past the place where he had been standing. He did not know any of it yet. For the first 4 days, while the kingdom made him a legend, when Caldera lay in a sterile white room and asleep, the doctors were keeping him in on purpose, with a tube breathing for the lung that had failed, and the only people who came to that room were Della, and Pip with her crayons, and a stream of guard officers in their good uniforms standing awkward at the foot of the bed, not knowing what to do with their hands. And one other visitor on the 4th night very late, when the corridors were empty and the press had gone home. A small straight-backed old woman with a saucer-sized bruise on her hip, who had discharged herself against medical advice and come across the city in an unmarked car to sit, for an hour in the dark, beside the bed of the man who had thrown her out of the path of her own death. I was there for that because I had taken to spending my off hours in the corridor outside his room, and because the Princess Royal, when she arrived, asked me to stay. She did not want, she said, to sit alone with a sleeping man and have it be improper or strange. She wanted a witness. She wanted, I think, simply not to be alone with what she was feeling. So I stood by the window and she sat by the bed, and for a while she said nothing at all, only looked at his face, the part of it that was not bandaged, with an expression I could not read. Then she said, without turning her head, "Do you know what I was going to say to those children, Sergeant, when I crossed to the rope?" "No, ma'am." "I was going to tell them that brave people are not people who are not afraid, that brave people are people who are afraid and do the necessary thing anyway. I had it all prepared. I had said it before, to other children, dozens of times. It is a good thing to say to a sick child." She was quiet a moment. "I have been saying it my whole life, and I am 71 years old, and I never once truly knew what it meant until I was lying on the ground with my hand scraped on the stone, and I looked up and saw that this man had spent his entire body to throw me out of the way. He was not unafraid. I saw his face. He was terrified, and he did it anyway in less time than it takes to say it, for a woman he had never spoken to in his life. She finally looked at me. "I have been protected my whole life, Sergeant, 7 decades, by men exactly like this one standing at gates and doors, men I walked past every day and never saw, the way you do not see a lamp post until the night it stops you from falling. I never saw them. I am ashamed of that. I am very deeply ashamed of that, and I am too old to pretend the shame away, and I am not going to." I did not know what to say to a princess who was making a confession to me in a dark hospital room, so I said the only true thing I had. "He'd tell you not to make a fuss, ma'am. It's the first thing he said to me on the stone. Don't make a fuss." She smiled then, a real smile, watery and surprised. "Did he? Yes, he would, wouldn't he?" And then the thing happened that turned this from a story about an accident into a story about something larger, because she reached into her bag and took out a photograph, an old one, creased soft at the corners, and she held it for a moment before she handed it to me. "I want to show you something. I have not shown anyone in a very long time. Look at the man on the left." It was a photograph from another era, gray, formal. A row of guardsmen in the old pattern of dress, standing before a gate I half recognized as the river gate of the palace in some bygone decade. The man on the left was young, perhaps 20, with a square jaw and steady eyes, and the particular stillness I had spent 19 years among. "His name was Tomas Caldera," the Princess Royal said. "He stood at the river gate the year I turned 6. There was a fire in the east wing, a real one, not the small kind. The nursery was in the east wing. I do not remember it. I was told it later, again and again, the way a family tells the story that made it. A guardsman went into the smoke and carried 2 children out, and went back for a third and got her, and his lungs were never the same again, and he was pensioned out at 24 and lived another 40 years on half a breath, and never once asked the family for anything beyond his due." She took the photograph back from me gently and looked at it. "The third child was me, Sergeant. I am alive. I have always been alive because a caldera ran into the fire. And now I am alive twice over because a caldera ran into the road." She looked at the sleeping man in the bed. "I do not believe in fate. I am too old and have seen too much for that. But I believe in this, that there are families who make a certain kind of man, generation after generation, quietly, without fuss, asking for nothing, and that the rest of us walk past them at the gates every day of our lives and do not see them, until the morning the fire comes or the car. I saw the name on his record when they brought it to me. Caldera. I had to come. Do you understand? I had to come and sit with him. It is the smallest possible repayment of the oldest possible debt, and it is nowhere near enough." She stayed the full hour. Before she left, she did a thing I have never told the press and never will, except now, here, where it belongs. She took Wynn's good hand, the same hand the Queen had held on the stone, and she folded it closed around the old creased photograph, so that when he woke he would find it in his fist and have to ask, and she leaned down close to his ear and said something I could not hear, and then she straightened, and put herself back together into the Princess Royal, and walked out of that room with her chin up and her cane tapping and a bruise the size of a saucer on her hip, and she did not look back. Because people of her generation do not, because to look back would be to make a fuss. When she had gone, I stood a long while by the window. The city was dark and quiet below, and I understood that something had changed in the size of the thing I was standing inside of. I had thought it was an accident, a terrible random Tuesday, a sick old man and a barrier left wide. And it was all of that. But it was also a thread that ran back through decades, through a fire and a road, through 2 men of one stubborn line who had both, without being asked, spent their bodies for the same family, and the kingdom that was busy turning Wynn into a poster did not know any of that, and would have made it cheap if it had. The truth was not cheap. The truth was that we are all, every one of us, walking past the people who would die for us, and not seeing them until the day we have to. Wynn woke on the 6th day. I was not there for the waking itself, Della was, and Pip, which is exactly as it should be, but I came that evening and the tube was out of his throat, and he was propped up at an angle with his ruined arm in a cage of steel and pins, and he was gray and shrunken and looked 10 years older than he had on the forecourt, and his eyes, when they found me in the doorway, were the same eyes. Staying. Fighting. And in his good hand, turning it over and over the way you worry a coin, was a soft-cornered photograph of a young man at a river gate. "Tavin," he said, his voice was a wreck. "Tavin, who is this? Della won't tell me, she says I have to ask you." He held up the photograph with enormous effort. "There's a name on the back. It's my name. It's my grandfather's name, Tomas, but it's the old uniform, and I never, Tavin, an old woman came. I don't remember it, I was under. But Della says an old woman came and put this in my hand, and I have been lying here for 2 days going slowly out of my mind. Who is she? Who was here?" And so I got to be the one to tell my friend, in a hospital bed, with his daughter asleep against his good side, that the woman he had thrown out of the path of a speeding car was alive and unhurt, and was the same child his grandfather had carried out of a fire 65 years before, that he came from a line of men who run toward the thing the rest of us run from, and that a Princess Royal of Eldermoor had crossed a dark city to sit an hour by his bed and call it the smallest possible repayment of the oldest possible debt. I watched it land on him. I watched my stubborn, fuss-hating, magnificent friend hear all of it and go very still, and then turn his face away to the window so I would not see what it did to him, and I had the grace, at least, to let him. The recovery was not a straight line. They never are, and his was crueler than most. For the first 10 days he climbed. The lung held. The bleeding stayed stopped. They took him off one machine and then another, and he sat up further each morning, and he made the nurses laugh, which is its own kind of vital sign, and the kingdom outside the window kept his name in the air. Then on the 11th day he ran a fever, and the fever climbed, and a thing the surgeons had feared, an infection deep in the smashed leg, around the steel they had put in to hold it, came up out of him like a tide, and he went backward fast and frightening, all the ground of those 10 days lost in 2. They took him back into surgery. They took out the steel and put in new steel. They poured antibiotics into him by the bagful and watched the fever and did not promise Della anything. And there were 2 nights in there that I will not describe because they are Della's and not mine, when the thing we had all decided was over reached back up and put its hand on him again. He came through it. He was, as the surgeon had said that first night, strong. But he came through it smaller, and the second round of surgery had cost the leg something it would not get back. And on the day they finally told him the long truth of it, when the fever was gone and his mind was clear enough to hear and hold a hard sentence, the surgeon sat down beside the bed, which they do when the news is heavy, and told my friend that he would walk again, in time, with work, that he would very likely run again, even after a fashion, that he would live a long, full life. But that he would not stand a post again, not the way the guard requires it, not the long, motionless hours on the hard stone in all weathers that had been the shape of Win Caldera's working life since he was 22. The leg would not take it. The reconstructed knee would not lock and hold the way the duty demanded. He could be many things, the surgeon said gently, but a ceremonial sentry, standing the long stillness. That door had closed on the forecourt. In the half-second he gave the Princess Royal, and it was not going to open again. I was in the room. Della had asked me to be there because she did not think she could hold it alone, and she was right. Wynne took it the way he took everything, with a flat soldier's nod, as if it were an order he disagreed with but would obey. He thanked the surgeon. He waited until the surgeon had gone, and then he said to the ceiling in a voice with nothing left in it, "Well, that's that then. They'll pension me out, same as Granddad, 24 he was. I got 10 more years than he did. He tried to make it a joke. It did not become one. What does a man do, Tavan, who's only ever been good at standing still?" I did not have an answer. I am not going to pretend I did. I sat with him in the not having of it, which is the only honest thing to do. And after a while Pip woke from her nap on the windowsill cot and came and climbed up onto the good side of him, careful of the cage on his arm the way a 6-year-old learns to be careful, and she put her drawing on his chest. And the drawing was the stick figure father the size of the palace, towering over the red scribble of the gates, and she said, "That's you guarding the Queen," with the total certainty of a child. And Wynne looked at it for a long time, and something moved behind his eyes, and he did not correct her. That was the low point. I want to be honest about that, because the cheaper version of this story would skip from the forecourt to the ceremony and let you believe it was all glory. It was not all glory. There was a long gray stretch in the middle of it where a good man lay in a hospital bed and grieved the only life he knew how to live, where the kingdom's adoration washing against the window felt like a cruelty rather than a comfort, because the kingdom wanted a hero and Wynne felt like a man who had been broken and set aside. The lamp guard, the world called him. He hated it. "A lamp gets clipped and stands there bent," he said once, bitterly in those days. "It doesn't do anything. It just gets hit. That's all I did. I just got hit." It was Inspector Aldrich, of all people, who pulled him out of it, though she did not set out to, and would be the first to say so. She came to the hospital in the 3rd week to take his statement, the formal record, the last witness she needed to close her quiet investigation. I sat in on it, and when the formal questions were done, Wynne asked her the thing that had been eating him, the thing he could not ask the doctors or Della or me. He asked her whether it had been worth it, not in those words. He asked her what would happen now, whether anything would actually change, or whether the letter in the tray and the barrier left wide and the whole careless chain would simply reset itself, and wait for the next confused old man and the next forecourt full of people, in which case, he said, looking at the cage on his arm, he had spent his leg for nothing but a moment's reprieve. Inspector Aldrich, who did not deal in comfort, considered the question with the seriousness he had earned, and then she told him what his half-second had actually bought, and it was a great deal more than he knew. Because of what happened on the forecourt, because the whole kingdom had watched a man very nearly die for a failure of the system, the slow tray that letters sat in had been set on fire, in the good sense. The process for pulling a dangerous license had been rebuilt in a month, the kind of rebuilding that ordinarily takes a decade of committees. Every closed-road checkpoint in the capital had been respecified. Hard barriers that no panicked old man could swing a car around, 2 officers minimum, never to be left. The medical reporting line between a family doctor and the licensing office, the one that had failed Corwin Pell and very nearly killed a princess, had been made direct and same day. "I have worked 30 years to get changes like these made," Inspector Aldrich told my friend. 30 years of writing reports that sit in trays of their own, and in 1 month, because of 1/2 second on one forecourt, I have gotten more of them than in the whole of my career before. There are confused old men who will be quietly taken off the road this year and never know it, and the families they would have driven into will never know it either, because the thing that would have happened to them now will not. You will never meet those people, Corporal. You will never get to count them. But they are real, and there are more of them than you would believe, and every one of them is walking around today because you did the necessary thing while you were afraid." She stood and gathered her folder, and at the door she turned back and said the only soft thing I ever heard her say. "A lamp that gets clipped and stands there bent is a warning to every driver who comes after that this is a place where care is owed. That is not nothing, Corporal. That is very nearly everything. Good day." She left. Wynne was quiet for a long time after that, but it was a different quiet than before. Something in him had been set back down on its feet. There was a thing that happened in the 7th week that I have to set down, because it did as much to bring my friend back from the gray place as anything Inspector Aldrich said, and because it tells you something about the house we serve that I think is worth the telling. The 2 royal children came to see him. It was not announced, and it was not a photo opportunity. I would not be setting it down here if it had been. It was the Queen's doing, and her reasoning, as it came to me later, was the same reasoning that had put her 2 children in the front of the courtyard for the ceremony to come. That a child who is going to grow up protected by men standing at gates had better learn, early and in person, the human cost of that protection, so that they never become the kind of grown person who walks past without seeing. Princess Malin was 8. Prince Joran was 10. They came on a quiet afternoon with their mother and one lady of the household, and they had made things, of course they had made things. That is what you do at 8 and 10 when a person is hurt. Joran had built, with great and visible labor, a model of the pavilion out of card and matchsticks, accurate down to the iron lamps, and he presented it with the stiff seriousness of a boy who has been told this is important and has decided to be equal to it. And Malin had drawn a picture, and the picture was of a red guardsman standing between a small stick figure with a crown and a large scribbled shape with wheels, and the red guardsman in the picture was enormous, the size of the whole page, the way Pip drew her father, and underneath, in the careful oversized letters of an 8-year-old, she had written, "Thank you for standing in the way." Win looked at that drawing for a long time. Pip, who was there, and who at 6 had decided that the two royal children were the most interesting people she had ever met and was watching them with frank fascination, edged closer and looked at it too. And then she said, with the devastating directness of her age, "I draw my daddy big like that as well, because he is big. To me." And the two children looked at the girl, and the girl looked at the two children, and some understanding passed between the three of them that was entirely beyond the reach of the adults in the room. The understanding of children who have all in their different ways, had to be brave about a father or a protector. And from that afternoon the three of them were thick as thieves, and remained so for years, which is a small strange grace that came out of a very dark thing, and I have always been glad of it. Before they left, Prince Joran, the 10-year-old, hung back, and he asked Win a question that he had clearly been carrying the whole visit, the way children carry the question they are not sure they are allowed to ask. He asked whether it had hurt. Whether Win had known when he ran that it was going to hurt that much, and had done it anyway. And Win, who would not lie to a child any more than he would make a fuss, told him the truth. "Yes," he said, "I knew it would hurt. I didn't have time to think about how much, but yes, I knew." He looked at the boy, this boy who would one day stand at the head of the house Win's family had served for generations. Here is the thing you want to understand if you remember nothing else. Being brave isn't not being afraid. Anybody who tells you they weren't afraid is either lying or wasn't paying attention. Being brave is being afraid and seeing the necessary thing and doing the necessary thing anyway, fast, before the fear can talk you out of it. That's all it is. It's not a feeling. It's a habit. You build it a little at a time, by doing small necessary things you don't want to do, for years, until the day comes when the necessary thing is large, and your body already knows how. The boy nodded slowly, the way a child nods when he has been given something he knows he will need later and does not yet fully understand. I watched the Queen by the door, hear her son's question answered better than she could have answered it herself, and I watched her decide not to interrupt, which is its own kind of wisdom in a parent. When they had gone, Win held Malin's drawing for a while, and then he asked Della to have it framed, and it hangs to this day in the office he built, on the wall behind his desk where he can see it when he looks up from the roots and the gate plans, and the long, careful work of finding the barrier left a foot too wide. "Thank you for standing in the way." He says it keeps him honest. He says a man can get lost in reports and committees and forget what the reports are for, and then he looks up at 8-year-old letters and remembers that the whole of it, every page and every meeting, is so that fewer guardsmen ever have to stand in the way at all. Still, there remained the hard practical fact of it, a guardsman who can no longer guard. The guard takes care of its own, there is a pension, there is a degree of honor, there is the awkward kindness of men in good uniforms standing at the foot of a bed. But Win was 34, with a wife and a daughter and 40 working years ahead of him, and a pension is a way of saying thank you and goodbye was the part he could not stomach. He did not want to be thanked and set aside. He wanted to be of use. It is the simplest thing in the world, and the one the world is worst at providing. There was talk in those weeks of what the formal recognition would be. A medal, certainly, the kind of decoration the royal house gives for exactly this, an act of conspicuous courage in the protection of a member of the family. There would be a ceremony. The palace let it be known, through the proper channels, that the Queen herself wished to make the presentation, which is rare, and that it would be done publicly, which the family almost never does, because the family had decided, Queen Saralyn had decided, that the kingdom which had watched the man nearly die should also watch him be honored, in the daylight, with his name said properly. And here the story very nearly went wrong in a way that would have broken Win's heart, and was saved by the only person who could have saved it. There was a faction, there always is, that wanted the ceremony to be one thing, a beautiful sad tableau, the broken hero in a wheelchair, the medal pinned to a chest that would never wear the red on a forecourt again, the kingdom weeping, the page turned. Honorable in its way. Final in its way. It would have made magnificent television. And it would have told Win Caldera in front of the whole kingdom exactly the thing he most feared, that he was finished, a thing that had happened, a story now closed and filed. The lamp guard honored and shelved. The Princess Royal heard of this plan. I do not know precisely how. She had her own channels, 7 decades deep. But she heard of it, and she did a thing that small straight-backed old women of her generation are very good at, which is to ruin a bad plan quietly and completely without ever once raising her voice. She asked to see the Queen, her sister, and whatever passed between the two of them in private, the shape of it came down to me afterward through Captain Doane, who had it from higher up, and it was this, that the Princess Royal had said, more or less, "I have been protected my whole life by men I never saw, and I will not now stand by and watch us take the one man I finally did see and turn him into a sad photograph. He did not run into that road to become a memorial. He ran into it because he is useful, because being useful is the whole of what his family is. And if we honor him by taking his usefulness away forever and pinning a medal where his life used to be, then we have learned nothing, and his grandfather went into the fire for nothing, and I would rather we did not bother." And Queen Saralind, who is a good queen precisely because she listens to her difficult elder sister, agreed. So the ceremony changed. And what it changed into is the turn of this whole story, the thing I have been carrying you toward, and I am going to tell it to you exactly as it happened, on a bright cold morning 4 months after the forecourt, because I was there, in the front rank in my best red, and I would not have missed it for the whole of the kingdom. It was held at the barracks in the great courtyard, which is a thing the guard does not generally open to the public. They opened it that day. The stands went up, the people came in their thousands, the band, the same band, I'd swear it, 3 streets over playing something cheerful, and a little flat played. The Queen was there, and the Prince Consort and the 2 royal children, Princess Malin and Prince Joran, scrubbed and solemn in their good clothes, because the Queen had decided they should see this, should understand early what is owed and by whom. And the Princess Royal was there in a new hat with her cane, sitting very straight. And Win came out into the courtyard, and he was not in a wheelchair. He had refused it. He had spent 4 months in a fight with his own ruined body that was, in its quiet way, every bit as hard as the half-second on the forecourt, the endless grinding work of physiotherapy, the standing, the falling, the standing again, the leg that did not want to take him and the will that made it. And he came out into that courtyard on his own 2 feet, leaning on a single black cane that I happened to know was the silver-topped one the Princess Royal had carried on the forecourt. Sent to him with a note, on his own 2 feet and in his own red tunic, which they had let out and taken in to fit the man he was now, and he walked slowly, with effort, with a hitch in it that would never fully leave. He walked the length of that courtyard to stand before his Queen. The kingdom made a sound, not the howl of the forecourt, the other sound, the one a great crowd makes when it sees a thing it did not think it would get to see. Queen Saralind did not pin a medal on a seated man and turn the page. She stood, she came down off the dais to do it, down onto the same level as the corporal, the way she had crouched to the height of a little boy on the forecourt steps 4 months before, and she faced him. And she said, in a voice pitched to carry to the last row of the stands, words I have written down and will not forget. "Corporal Caldera, you were posted to protect us, and you did. There is a medal, and you will have it, and it is the least of what is owed. But a medal is a thing for a story that is over, and your story is not over, and we will not insult you by pretending it is." She let that sit a moment in front of the kingdom. "You come from a line of men who have served this house with their bodies for as long as this house has stood and asked nothing and been seen by no one. That ends today. Not the service is in your blood, and we would not take it if we could. The not being seen, that ends today." She pinned the medal then, a small bright thing, far too small for what it stood for, the way medals always are, and she pinned it. And then she did not step back. She stayed close, and she said the part that changed his life, and she said it loudly enough for the kingdom to hear, because she meant it to be heard and to be held too. You can no longer stand a post. We are told this and we accept it, and it grieves us. But a man does not protect a kingdom only by standing still at a gate. You have spent 19 years learning to see the trouble in a crowd 3 seconds before anyone else. I am told this is so. I am told it was the looking, not the standing, that put you in the right place on the forecourt. We have need of that looking. There is to be a new office, corporal, established by the crown. A service that studies how the small, careless failures line up into the large catastrophes, that walks the routes and the gates before the family ever does, and finds the barrier left a foot too wide and the letter left in the tray, and closes the gap before the next confused old man finds it. It does not yet have a head. It does now. It is yours if you will have it, for as long as you want it, at a colonel's rank and a colonel's pay, and you may build it as you see fit. And the first thing it will do is make certain that what nearly happened on that forecourt can never happen on another. She looked at him, this old queen, at this broken corporal, in front of the whole kingdom. You ran into the road because being useful is the whole of what your family is. So be useful. Be useful for 40 more years. That is your queen's command, and I should warn you it is not the sort I expect to be refused. I have stood in a great many ceremonies in my 19 years. I have heard a great many fine words said over a great many honored men. I had never, until that morning, seen the words actually change the future of the man they were said to, in real time on his feet in front of everyone. I watched it happen. I watched Win Caldera, who 3 months before had asked the ceiling of a hospital room what a man does who is only good at standing still. Hear his queen tell the kingdom that the standing still had never been the point, that the point had always been the seeing, and the seeing was not broken, and the seeing was wanted, and I watched 20 years come off him where he stood. He did not weep. He is not a man who weeps in front of a crowd. He had turned his face to a hospital window rather than let me see it, and he was not going to give it to the kingdom now. But he came to attention, on his ruined leg, on the borrowed cane, in the let-out red, and he saluted his queen with the good hand, the same hand she had held on the stone, and the Princess Royal had folded around a photograph, and his voice when he answered her did not shake. "Ma'am," he said, "I'd stand for that, but I find I still can't get up." It was the same line, the line from the forecourt. He gave it back to her deliberately, a private thing made public, and the Queen of Eldermoor laughed out loud in front of her kingdom for the second time in 4 months. And the kingdom, not knowing the history of the joke but feeling its warmth, laughed with her, and then it rose, all of it, the thousands in the stands, the band, the men in red, the 2 royal children, the Princess Royal getting slowly and painfully to her feet on her bruised hip, because she was not going to receive this sitting down. The whole courtyard rose, and the sound it made was the third sound, the one I had not heard before and have not heard since, the sound a kingdom makes when it has finally, for once, managed to see the man at the gate. I want to tell you the smaller things now, because the smaller things are where the truth lives. The Princess Royal and Win became, in the years that followed, something like friends, which is not a word you are supposed to use across that distance, but I do not have a better one. She sat on the board of his new office, would not be talked out of it, and she was, by all accounts, a holy terror in the meetings, asking the questions no one else dared, refusing to let a recommendation die in a tray ever again. She had spent her life on a children's foundation. She understood committees the way Win understood crowds. Between the 2 of them they made the new office into something with teeth, and over the next decade the things it quietly prevented were many and went, as Inspector Aldrich had promised, entirely uncounted, because that is the nature of a catastrophe averted. It leaves no mark, only an ordinary Tuesday that stayed ordinary. Corwin Pell died the following winter in a care home, gently, his fading mind by then mercifully past the reach of what he had done. Win went to the funeral. I asked him why, and he looked at me for a moment as if the question were strange, and then he said, "Because he didn't mean it, Tavin. Not for 1 second of it did he mean it." He was a frightened man on a road he didn't understand, and the thing that put him there was 100 small failures by people who weren't frightened and should have known better. I'm not angry at a frightened old man. I never was. The office is so there are fewer frightened old men on roads they don't understand. You can't do that work with hate in you. The hate gets in the way of the looking. And he went, and he stood at the back, leaning on the silver-topped cane, and he was the only one there who was not family, and I think it mattered to the man's widow more than she could say. The constable, the one who had stepped away from the barrier to help the fainting spectator, who had left the gap a foot too wide, Win went looking for him too. The young man had not been able to forgive himself. He had handed in his papers, he was drowning, and Win, who had every reason in the world to let the man drown, sought him out instead and offered him a job. The first job in the new office, in fact. "I need someone," Win told him, "who will never again, as long as he lives, leave a barrier a foot too wide, who will check it and check it and check it because he knows in his body what 1 foot costs. I cannot think of a man in this kingdom more qualified than you." It was either the cruelest thing he could have said or the kindest, and Win made it the kindest, and the young man took the job, and became, I am told, ferociously good at it, and the two of them never once spoke of the forecourt again, because they did not have to. It stood between them every day like a thing understood, and was the foundation of everything they built. That is the kind of man my friend is. I told you at the start that a hero is a flat thing, a poster, and that Win was not flat. I have spent all these pages trying to show you the not flatness, the stubbornness, the fuss-hating, the man who would seek out the family of the driver who broke him and stand at the back of the funeral, who would hire the constable whose 1 foot of barrier nearly killed a princess, because being useful is the whole of what his family is, and you cannot be useful with hate in you because the hate gets in the way of the looking. Pip is 11 now. She no longer draws her father as a stick figure the size of the palace. She draws, these days, with an unsettling and growing skill, and last year she drew him properly from life, leaning on the silver cane at the gate of his new office, and she got the hitch in his stance exactly right, and the looking in his eyes exactly right, and when he saw it he had to turn his face to the window again, and this time, his daughter being his daughter and not the kingdom, he let her see. She keeps the old photograph now, the soft-cornered one of Tomas Caldera at the river gate, in a frame on her desk, next to the drawing of her father, 2 men of one stubborn line who ran toward the fire and the road, and she has told her mother that she does not yet know what she will be, but that she would like it to be a thing where you are useful, where you look after people who do not know to look after themselves, and Della does not know whether to be proud or afraid, which is, I think, the correct response of any parent to a child who has decided to be that kind of person. The Princess Royal lived another 6 years, and ran her foundation and terrorized her committees to the very end, and when she died, gently, in her own bed, at a great age, having squeezed every drop of use out of a long life, it came out in the reading of her affairs that she had quietly endowed a thing in her will. A fund, modest and permanent, for the families of guardsmen hurt in the line of their duty, the men who stand at the gates and are not seen, so that no Della would ever again have to cry herself past crying in a waiting room wondering how the rent would be paid. She had named it, in the dry legal language of the bequest, the Caldera Fund. Win did not know until the will was read. He sat very still when he heard, the way he sits, and then he said to no one in particular, "She saw us," and that was all, and it was everything. I am near the end now, and I find I want to tell you the last thing in the plainest words I have. I have stood at gates for 19 years. I will stand at them for a few more, and then I will be pensioned out in the ordinary way, with my ordinary thanks, having never once in my whole career done a thing that the kingdom will remember. And that is exactly as it should be, because the work of a guardsman is to be the thing that is not needed, the wall that is never tested, the lamp that is never clipped. We are not supposed to be seen. We are supposed to be there, every day, in all weathers, always looking at the place the trouble will come from, so that on the day it comes, one of us happens, by the blind accident of the roster, to be standing in the only place from which the necessary thing can be done. Most of us go our whole lives and that day never comes, and we are glad of it, and we count the minutes until the relief comes at 4 and think about the good bread in the canteen, and there is no shame in it. It is the job. But the day does come sometimes. It came for Tomas Caldera in a fire when he was 24. It came for his grandson on a bright blue Tuesday on a swept forecourt, and it came dressed, as it always does, as an ordinary afternoon, with a brass band and a balloon cart and an old woman in a hat who wanted only to cross 40 feet of stone and thank some sick children. And on that day my friend, who was afraid I saw his face, he was terrified, did the necessary thing anyway in less time than it takes to say it, for a woman he had never spoken to in his life, and he spent his body to the last coin to do it, and he asked for nothing, and the only words he had when it was done were, "Don't make a fuss, asterisk." I have made a fuss. I have written it all down, every page of it, against his explicit wishes, and I will give it to him when it is finished, and he will scowl at me, and tell me I have got it all wrong and made far too much of it, and that he just got hit, that a lamp just gets clipped and stands there bent. And he will be wrong for once in his stubborn life, and I will tell him so. A lamp that stands there bent is a warning to every driver who comes after that this is a place where care is owed. That is not nothing. That is very nearly everything. If you take one thing from all of this, take this, because it is the only thing I am sure of after 19 years at the gate. You are walking, right now, every day of your life, past the people who would die for you. The man at the door you do not look at. The woman who checks the barrier you do not notice. The whole quiet line of them, generation after generation, asking nothing, seen by no one, standing in all weathers, looking at the place the trouble will come from. Most days they are not needed and you walk past, and that is the whole point of them. But they are there. They have always been there. And on the day the fire comes, or the car, one of them will already be moving, before you have even understood that anything is wrong, because the decision was made long before you arrived, in a mountain regiment, or in a fire 65 years gone, or simply in the kind of man a certain stubborn family makes. And the least you can do, the very least, the smallest possible repayment of the oldest possible debt, is to see them while there is still time, to look up, to say the name, to not walk past. That is what the old woman learned on the stone with her hands scraped raw. That is what a kingdom learned on a bright cold morning, when a broken corporal walked the length of a courtyard on his own 2 feet. And that is what I have spent all these pages trying to give to you, so that you do not have to learn it the way she did. His name was Corporal Colonel, now and forever in my heart, the Corporal Win Caldera. He came from a line of men who run toward the thing the rest of us run from. He could no longer stand a post, so they gave him a kingdom to look after instead, and he looks after it still, leaning on a silver-topped cane, at a gate he built himself, watching the people, because the people are the weather, and the weather is where the trouble comes from. I was there, I saw all of it, and I will not make the mistake the old woman made. I will not wait for the fire. I see him, I have always seen him. That is the whole of it, that is the fuss I have made.